My name is Daniel Whitaker and I am 27 years old. I was raised in Billings, Montana, a place that has always been close to the wilderness but not quite within it. From an early age, I was the kind of boy who gravitated toward the silence of the forest rather than the noise of the city. While other kids in my neighborhood played video games or gathered at the local skate park, I spent long hours alone in the woods behind our house, following deer tracks, identifying wild plants with library books, and sitting so still that chickadees would sometimes land on my shoulders. Those early experiences shaped me, and when the time came to choose a career, there was little question about where I belonged. I studied environmental science and forestry at the University of Montana. My professor said I had a good head for detail, and I earned high marks, but more than that, I had a stubborn streak that kept me working long after others had given up. I wanted to join the National Park Service, to work in a place that was vast, wild, and untamed, and after several years of seasonal jobs, clearing trails, assisting visitors, and managing campgrounds, I finally received the offer that felt like destiny itself. I had been selected as a full-time ranger in Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is not just a park. It is a living monument, a landscape that breathes and shifts in ways no human fully controls. Its geysers roar from the Earth's core, its rivers slice through vallieder than memory, and its forests stretch farther than the eye can trace. To work there is to stand in the oldest cathedral imaginable, built not of stone and glass, but of basalt, steam, and pine. I felt honored, proud, and prepared, or so I thought. I did not yet understand that Yellowstone holds secrets not found in any training manual. On my first day, I reported to the ranger station near Mammoth Hot Springs. The building smelled faintly of wet wool and wood smoke, with maps pinned across the walls and radios crackling at intervals. The chief ranger, a heavyset man named Harold Jennings, greeted me with a firm handshake and a measured look. His eyes studied me as though weighing whether I belonged. He gave me the kind of welcome that carried a warning underneath it, though I couldn't quite place what it meant. "Whitaker, you'll be covering the northern sector this season," he said, pointing at the map. "It's not the busiest area, but it can surprise you. You'll learn to handle yourself quick enough. Yellowstone isn't forgiving to the careless." I nodded and assured him I was ready, though my nerves were buzzing like static electricity. He assigned me to a small cabin deep in the forest, a place used by rangers on rotation, and told me I would spend the next 2 weeks stationed there. Before coming back for a full debrief, he mentioned routine patrols, keeping logs of wildlife, monitoring campers, and checking for fire risks. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested the unease behind his eyes. The drive to my assigned cabin took me along narrow roads, flanked by towering lodgepole pines that seemed to whisper in the wind. The further I went, the fewer signs of civilization I saw. Finally, the trees opened to a clearing, and the cabin appeared, small, sturdy, with a porch that faced the mountains. The structure looked as though it had been standing for decades, weathered but resilient. I parked the truck, carried my gear inside, and took my first breath as the caretaker of this slice of wilderness. That night, the air was crisp, the stars stretched across the sky in dizzying number, and the silence of the woods settled around me like a blanket. I thought it would be easy to sleep, but sometime around midnight, I awoke to a sound. It wasn't the cry of a coyote or the crack of shifting branches. It was softer, stranger, like a long, low humming carried by the wind. I sat up in bed, straining to hear, and for a moment, it almost seemed like a voice. But when I stepped outside with my flashlight, the forest was still. Only the pines swayed slightly in the darkness, and the sound was gone. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the wind across the valley, and went back to bed. Still, the unease lingered, burrowing beneath my thoughts. The next morning, I began my patrol. I hiked along a ridge where elk trails wound through the undergrowth, noting tracks and signs for my log. I paused at an overlook that surveyed the valley, taking in the grandeur of Yellowstone's vastness. I felt small, but in a comforting way, as though I were part of something greater than myself. Yet as I wrote notes, I noticed something odd in the distance. In the far stretch of the valley, where the trees thickened to a nearly black mass, there was a clearing I did not recognize on any map. From that distance, I could see that the trees around the clearing leaned inward at strange angles, as though bowing towards something at the center. I intended to make my way there in time, but my first days were full of routine duties. I met hikers and guided them back to their trails, cleared debris from a storm, and checked campsites for signs of bears. Yet at night, I continued awake to that faint humming sound. Sometimes it came from far away, other times closer, always too indistinct to trace. My radio remained silent, no reports of trouble, no explanation. On the 5th day, I finally decided to head toward that strange clearing. The hike was longer than I expected, the terrain uneven and tangled with brush. As I drew nearer, the air grew unnaturally still. Birds fell silent. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. When I stepped into the clearing, my first impression was that something about it was wrong, though I could not immediately say why. The ground was bare of grass, as though scorched, though there had been no fire. At the center stood a single stone, taller than me, rough and jagged, with markings carved across its surface. They weren't letters I recognized, not English, not native pictographs, not anything from the textbooks I had studied. The grooves seemed random at first, but when I ran my hand across them, I realized they were deliberate. They formed patterns, spirals that pulled the eye inward, like being drawn into a whirlpool. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. The stone hummed faintly beneath my palm, the same tone I had heard at night. I snatched my hand back as if burned, stumbling away, heart hammering. It was impossible, I told myself. Stones don't hum. They don't make sounds in the night. Yet I knew what I had felt, and it rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I forced myself to complete a full survey, circling the clearing, sketching rough notes for the log. The entire area felt wrong, a place untouched not because of inaccessibility, but because something kept life away. No plants grew near the stone. No animals passed through. It was an emptiness at the heart of the forest. I returned to the cabin that evening, unsettled. I should have reported my discovery to the station, but something held me back. I could already imagine the look on Chief Jennings' face if I called in about a humming stone. He would mark me as a rookie prone to nervous exaggerations, not the reliable ranger I wanted to prove myself as. I decided to wait, to gather more evidence before saying anything. That night, the humming returned, louder than before. It vibrated against the walls of the cabin, faint but insistent, like a distant engine running in the ground itself. Sleep was impossible. I sat at the table with my lantern burning low, staring at the logbook I was supposed to be filling with neat, rational entries about wildlife and trail conditions. Instead, my mind kept circling back to the stone, to the spirals carved into its surface, to the way it had seemed to pulse under my hand. The following day, I noticed something even stranger. On my hike toward the river, I found footprints in the mud. They were human but odd. The stride was long, too long for any average person, and the impressions were deep, as though whoever had made them carried great weight. I followed them until they veered sharply off the trail and into thick undergrowth. Beyond that point, they vanished, as though the maker had simply disappeared into thin air. That night, the humming grew into something worse. It carried a rhythm, like a chant. I swear I heard it shaping syllables, though not in any language I knew. I pressed my pillow over my ears, but the sound vibrated through bone rather than air. At some point, I must have drifted into restless sleep, for I dreamed of the stone, glowing faintly, its spirals twisting open into a dark tunnel that pulled me down into a hollow beneath the forest. I awoke with my bedsheets damp with sweat, and my heart pounding as though I had been running. By the end of my first week, I knew something was terribly wrong in these woods. The question was no longer whether I was imagining things, but whether I had the courage to face what lay at the center of them. The question was no longer whether I was imagining things, but what I would do about the thing I could no longer ignore. When daylight came thin and gray through the pines, I packed the day pack the way they taught us at Academy. Water, snacks dense with calories, foil blanket, field nair, batteries, map, compass, small roll of flagging tape, and a whistle on a lanyard I had never once used outside of demonstrations for school groups. I slid my service radio onto my belt and checked the battery twice. I told myself I was only going to mark the coordinates of the clearing more precisely, take rubbings of the carvings, and then hike out. I told myself a great many reasonable things. The trail climbed a ridge where the lodgepole grew tighter together, and the world smelled of pitch and cold earth. I moved slow, like I'd learned on wildlife surveys, placing my feet on flat rock or thick root to leave less scent on the ground. There's a superstition among older rangers that a place remembers you if you press too hard on it. I don't believe that, but I did it anyway. Somewhere to my left a raven croaked, and somewhere far ahead the river worked itself into a white noise that sounded like the inside of a shell. I sawed elk sign, bear scat gone to seeds, and one clean line of coyote prints laid like punctuation marks along the damp sand of a dry creek bed. Everything read as normal until it didn't. At a bend where sun filtered down in hard bars through the canopy, I came upon a boundary I had not noticed before. An ordinary person would have walked through it and never thought twice. But rangers are trained to see patterns. The lodgepoles on either side of the narrow way had a kink in them, a subtle crook like a shoulder shrug. Every tree bent the same direction, toward a center. Moss grew thicker on that side. Even the ants' trails on the fallen logs seemed to slip around an invisible curve in the air. The hair on my forearms prickled as though a wind had risen, though not a needle moved. I stood with one boot over the threshold, then I stepped fully through. Silence isn't a lack of sound, it's a presence. It presses at your eardrums, it steals comparison, so that the scuff of your boot sole is suddenly an explosion. That was the silence in the clearing. The ground was bare in a perfect oval as before, a dead patch of dirt the color of ash, and the stone in the middle rose taller than I remembered. The spiral carvings were there, yes, but I also saw shallow cups cut into the face of the rock, depressions like the places where water puddles and evaporates and leaves a trace ring. When I touched one with 2 fingers, it felt strangely warm. When I pressed my palm flat against the spiral, I felt again that low hum, so deep it registers first as a weight in your bones. I yanked my hand away, like I touched an electrified fence. I forced method over feeling. I measured step distances with my pace count, hung 3 strips of orange flagging tape on 3 different trunks just outside the open ground, and laid my map flat on my knee to make notes. I did a rough sketch of the stone with a pencil stub, and shaded the grooves to show the depth. I took a rubbing of one spiral, taping paper to the rock and dragging the graphite over it until the lines rose like a fossil under sand. When I glanced up, I realized something that made the pencil stop in my hand. The stone wasn't exactly where my sketch placed it. Not by much, maybe a foot, maybe less, but lines I'd drawn between 3 fixed points didn't meet the way they had when I started. I stood and checked the flagging. The trees hadn't moved. The map hadn't changed. The stone was simply in a slightly different spot, and I could not prove it. I unhooked the radio and keyed the mic. "Station, this is Ranger Whittaker checking in." Nothing but the gentle hiss of open channel. I tried again. "Station, this is Whittaker on patrol in the northern sector." "Copy." A long moment passed. Then, cutting through the hiss, Chief Jennings' voice arrived, compressed by distance like a man speaking from the bottom of a culvert. "Copy you, Whittaker. Go ahead. I'm conducting routine survey near Slough Creek." I lied without knowing why. "Signal seems spotty. Just confirming communications." "Copy. Terrain's tricky up there. Check in again at 1400. "Will do." I clipped the radio back and felt watched. Not the way you feel watched by a predator. There's an edge to that, a math of distances and teeth. This felt like being watched by a room. I circled the stone, looking for tool marks that would tell me a prankster had hauled it here and carved it up. There were none. In one of the little shallow cups I hadn't noticed before, a crusted residue had dried like the inside of a kettle. I pried a fleck away with my fingernail. It wasn't sap. It flaked like mineral and smelled faintly metallic. Something like the scent of pennies or a cut on your lip. A crunch sounded behind me, the light, deliberate step of a human in soft soles. I spun around, hand on my belt, and found myself facing a ranger I did not know. She was maybe in her early 40s, tall, lean, with a face weathered not by age but by wind and sun and the habit of not smiling without reason. Her hair was braided under a flat hat stained by years of rain. Her shoulder patch was old enough that the embroidery had blurred slightly, and her badge was polished bright. She had the watchful stillness of someone who had belonged to this backcountry longer than any map. "Morning," she said, voice low, hands away from her sides to show she meant no harm. "Hold breath long enough, you'll pass out in this place." I wasn't holding my breath, I said, though my chest felt tight. "Ranger Daniel Whitaker. New assignment. I know who you are." She tipped her hat a fraction. "Willa Crow, Deputy North Sector." I'd read that name in a roster taped to the station board, but I hadn't met her. She stepped closer to the boundary and stopped there, as if some line had been drawn in the dirt that I couldn't see. Her eyes took in the stone, the flagging tape I had hung, the rubbing tape to the rock, my half-made notes. She didn't ask permission to inspect. She simply looked, as if she were counting the facts the way a tracker counts bent grass. "You put your hand on it?" she said. Not a question. "Did," I said. "It vibrates? Hums?" she said, like correcting a child about the proper name for a tool. "If you come at dusk, it sings." "What is it?" I asked. "Glacial erratic basalt spire. Some old boundary marker I didn't learn about in training." "You won't find it in any training," Willa said. "Pull your tape." I looked at the bright strips like a lifeline. "I'm marking a hazard." She shook her head once. "You mark what you want drivers to avoid. This doesn't show on paper for a reason." "What reason?" I asked. "If it's dangerous, everything's dangerous. Rivers drown, geysers scald. Bison toss tourists into the air like confetti. We don't put the river on a separate map for that." She finally stepped into the clearing and came within an arm's length of the stone. She did not touch it. "You listen now, Whitaker. There are places in this park that aren't ours. That's not some spiritual line. That's plain practical. People go where they don't belong. They get harvested by what lives there. Our job is to confuse the path so folks don't walk straight into a threshing machine." Her words were not the kind you say to a rookie, unless you're either hazing him or telling the truth. You've kept long enough to become numb to its sound. I watched her face for the flicker of a joke. None came. "You've been here alone at night," she said. "You heard it hum. That was your first mistake. What's the second? Thinking it's a thing." She glanced up at the lean of the trees. "On paper, you'll call this a no-name meadow. On the radio, if you have to refer to it, you'll say you're clear of the quiet. Only if you have to, Daniel, do you hear me?" She let my first name rest on the air, as though to see if it fit me. "And you don't come after dark." "You came looking for me," I said. She nodded at my flagging tape. "Bright marker tells the wrong kind of people where to go. Wrong kind of people in this case includes you." "I'm a ranger," I said, as if the word had power. "I found human tracks out here too. Not recent, maybe a day or two old, stride too long. Deep imprints. They stopped in brush, like the person lifted off the ground." "You found where they stopped," Willa said. "You didn't find where they went." She pointed past me. Beyond the stone, at a stand of brush that looked like any other. "If you go in there, you'll lose the trail because there isn't one. The ground doesn't keep what walks through it. Don't force it to take you as payment." I wanted to argue. Training pushes rangers to curiosity and documentation. You don't leave a mystery in your sector if there's a chance it ties to public safety. But Willa carried the authority of someone who had stood and counted their choices down to 2, and then chosen the one that kept her alive. I pulled the strips of tape down one by one and folded them into my jacket pocket. The air around the stone shifted, not wind, but a subtle thinning, a slight drop in temperature you feel across your cheeks. Willa's eyes flicked toward it, and for a heartbeat I saw something like grief move behind her calm. "The chief sent you?" I asked. to have something to ask. Chief didn't need to, she said. Some track isn't prints in dirt. Some track is a pattern in the noise. I heard a new voice on the morning check, and that sounded too clean for this backcountry, and I knew you'd go looking for the one thing you weren't told about. All new rangers do. It's a kind of fever. Some die from it. She gestured with her chin. Come on. Where? A mile north. There's something you need to see if I want you to live through your first season. We left the clearing without turning our backs to the stone, until the brush hit it. The moment we crossed the invisible boundary, the silence eased, and birdsong stitched itself back into the air like a seam being mended. Willa set a pace that stretched my legs without exhausting them. We walked through a corridor of lodgepole and came into a small swale where mud stayed damp on the surface even after long sun. Willa knelt at the edge. She pointed without touching. 5 impressions lay in the mud, each the size of a large hand, with long digits splayed like the starfish you find dried in coastal gift shops. They weren't human, weren't bear, weren't cat. They were not any animal I'd learned to identify. Each toe ended in a blunt pressure, not a claw. The stride between them was wrong. The direction they pointed did not match the way the mud had been compressed. I crouched and felt a coldness under the surface, like my fingertips had reached down to a different day's weather. What made that? I asked. Names are bait, Willa said. If you name it, you'll think too much about it. Thinking makes you slow. Slow gets you kept. Kept, I repeated. Some places digest the way a swamp digests, she said. Slowly, over time, with patience thicker than ours. So what do? Avoid it? Make a perimeter? Tell people this swale is off limits. She stood and brushed her palms clean on her pants. We do what we've done since long before the patches changed on our sleeves, she said. We redirect. We burn brush in spring in a way that convinces people to camp elsewhere. We move trail cairns when they migrate too close to places that drink footsteps. We tell stories at visitor talks that push hikers into valleys we know are honest. We keep the appetites on a diet that doesn't include school children or honeymooners. Sometimes we bring the bodies of animals that would rot otherwise, things killed by cars, things shot illegally and seized. We drop them in openings that need feeding so they don't come walking for something warm. I stared at her. You're saying we bait it. I'm saying we acknowledge what the ground asks for and pay the bill we can afford to pay. I thought of the residue in the stone's cups and understood why it smelled metallic, and Chief Jennings' nose. She looked at me like I was bright, but too young to carry the thing I'd picked up. His father knew, she said. My predecessor knew. I know. I need you to know and not report like you're writing an academic paper for people who have never spent a night out here with the lights off. I wanted to reject it. The Park Service is built on transparency, public trust, stewardship. We aren't priests in some secret order. We wear our badges where everyone can see them. But then I heard again the night hum coming through the cabin walls and saw the way the trees leaned, and I remembered a set of human footprints that ended without ending. Some truths are not noble when spoken with bureaucratic clarity. They're simply loud enough to invite more of themselves. As if to underline it, the radio on my belt gave a crackle, and then a burst of static that pulled like a nail across enamel. A few words rode the noise. Units black tags after hours copied to east. Then the channel drowned again. Willa and I both froze, each of us staring at the other's radio like we expected something to emerge from the speaker. She reached over and turned her volume down halfway. They're out early, she said, mostly to herself. Who? Maintenance, she said. That's what their jackets say. She unshouldered her pack and pulled free a laminated binder the size of a field guide. It was old, the edges rounded by use, the plastic scratched opaque in places. Inside were pages with maps clipped from older maps, annotations in tight pencil script, and photographs stuck down with brittle tape. She flipped to a page marked with an orange tab and held it where I could see. The photograph was black and white, though color film had existed when it was taken. One of those choices that speaks to how people want a thing to look. Men stood in a circle in the snow, their hats all the same, their coats buttoned to the neck. At their feet lay the ribcage of something large, white as a cathedral window, ribs arsing up like fingers. In the background, a stone I recognized rose from the clearing like a tooth. The year that was taken, Willa said, the geysers blew out with no warning. Steam burned 3 people on the boardwalk at Old Faithful. The ground under Mammoth shifted 4 inches in a day. They used to keep records like scripture. Now we keep records like recipes. Which one you think works better when the earth decides to move and something old knocks on the underside of the world? What are the black tags? I asked, hearing the phrase she had half covered with a lie. She slid the binder back in her pack. It's not my job to call their units what they call themselves. Whose job is it? She looked at me steadily. If you're asked to help after hours, you go with someone who knows the routes. You keep your head down. You don't touch your radio unless you're told. You don't write down what you see. You do not stand inside the circle. You keep your hands closed. I followed her back toward my cabin because there was nowhere else to go. At the door, she paused like someone about to step into a church, not for reverence but to steel herself. Lock up tonight, she said. Not because a lock will stop anything worth stopping, but because ritual reminds you of the boundary between your bones and the dark. Sleep with your boots by the bed. I thought you said don't come after dark. I said don't go to that clearing after dark, she corrected. Dark comes whether you invite it or not. You don't ever, and I mean ever, answer your door if someone knocks, and you don't see their breath. She left me with that, and the emptiness she took with her was a presence, a shape I could have reached out and circled with my fingers. I closed the cabin door behind me and slid the bolt. I made tea because hot water feels like control. I tried to write up a report that said nothing and said everything. Wildlife activity normal, campers compliant, trail maintenance ongoing. I wrote the word ongoing and realized that words are small wires strung over a canyon. It was full dark when I heard the first distant hum. I wouldn't have heard if I had turned the radio to music, but we don't do that in the backcountry. You keep the channels open, you listen, you let the human voices be the thing that makes the dark bearable. The hum came under the radio static, under the kettle hissing on the stove, under the wind easing its shoulders against the logs. It was lower than a foghorn, higher than a diesel engine idling on a winter morning, like both and neither, like a throat with a hollow inside it. The second sound was wheels on gravel. Truck lights washed through the trees in a slow sweep, twin cones cut by moving branches. I stepped to the window and cut my lantern down to a thread of flame. A flapid rolled past the clearing, heading toward a service road that I knew only in daytime. 2 men rode up front in park-issue jackets. One leaned forward in the seat like he expected deer at any moment. The other spoke into a handheld mic. On the back of the flabid was a tarp, and the tarp covered a shape I knew was an animal by the way it lay. Dead things lose their geometry but not their story. The tarp sagged between ribs. They didn't stop at my cabin. The hum thickened in the direction they were going so that the window pane shivered a quarter hair in its frame. I told myself I could go to bed and know nothing else. I put my boots on instead. I took the flashlight and the whistle and left the radio on the table. I stepped into the night air like stepping into a throat. I kept parallel to the service road, using the trees as cover. The flapid didn't drive far. It idled at the edge of a stand of brush that swallowed its lights like fog swallows a lighthouse beam. 2 more dim shapes stood in the trees beyond, trucks with their engines off, silhouettes that looked like shadows had learned how to park. I recognized Chief Jennings by his stance. Feet set like a man who needs the ground to know where he is. Willa stood near him, arms crossed, a posture that hid her hands. 2 men I did not know worked the back of the flatbed, loosening the tarp. They did it gently, with a care I had seen applied to people, not carcasses. When the tarp came away, the dead bison calf lay revealed, hair dark, eyes open to the stars it would no longer see. They lifted it with a sling. It took 4 of them to carry, and they moved slow, the way pallbearers move. Not for the dead, but for the living who watch. They walked toward the place where the trees leaned and then stopped. A moment passed where nothing happened, and then the night moved around them like someone had stepped from behind a curtain. I was close enough to hear Jennings speak. His voice was gentle in a way I had not expected. "We pay what we owe," he said. "We keep our people safe. We keep your hunger from crossing asphalt. We keep the ground still." They set the calf down on the dirt. Willa did not look at it. She looked at the faces of the men as you might look at a compass. The hum rose and the men stepped back, and something not wind passed through the clearing and under the trucks and along the road and under my ribs and out the other side. Hungry is the only word I can give you. Hungry like a winter that never ends. Hungry like a mouth trying to remember how to be a mouth. The ground did not open. No cartoon of jaws and teeth rose from the earth. Instead, the spiral on the stone darkened as if a shadow moved through it from within, and the shallow cups I had seen filled with a slickness that caught the starlight like oil on water. The carcass sighed, not breath, decay air, gas leaving muscle. The hum resolved into almost words that braided with one another and fell apart. My eyes watered without tears, Jennings said, and the men obeyed. Willa's eyes shifted left, and I realized she had seen me before I had seen her seeing me. She lifted her hand from her armpit and spread her fingers subtly once. I understood it as clearly as if she had whispered my name. "Don't move." The calf's hide tightened on its frame the way fabric tightens on a drum. There was a sound like 1,000 strings being plucked at once far away. A smell of hot metal and wet stone rose. The shallow cups on the stone brimmed and tipped and let their contents run back into the spiral lines, and there was an impression, only that, of something satisfying a condition we will never learn to name. The hum eased. The men stood without moving. No one spoke into a radio. No one took a picture. The calf looked smaller. Jennings finally said, "We're done here," like he was closing a door in his throat. The men moved to refold the tarp, but didn't cover the animal. They left it as if an agreement required it. They got in the trucks and turned them around carefully. Tires stayed out of the boundary. Willa remained a second longer. She looked at the stone, then into the trees where I was. She did not cast her gaze like a spotlight. It was a quiet acknowledgement, the way you nod to a deer at the edge of a meadow in the last light. Then she left with the others. I waited for the hum to fall the rest of the way to nothing. It never did. It became again what it had been under everything, an undernote the world has always kept. When the trucks had been gone long enough that even the smell of exhaust had lifted off the road, I eased backward, slow as a man who has found the limits of his courage. I circled wide. I did not look directly at the clearing. I did not look directly at the stars in case they looked back. At the cabin, I slid the bolt and set the chain and placed a kitchen chair under the handle like a man in a movie who knows locks are more for ritual than protection. I did not sleep. I sat at the table with my hands around a mug I forgot to drink. Sometime in the hour when night is most itself, a knock came at the door. It was gentle, 3 even raps. If you have not spent time alone in a cabin in the back country, you might not know how much of a person a knock is. It carries posture through wood. It carries breath. It carries whether the one outside is careful with their hands. I sat without moving. The knock came again. 3 even raps. I waited for the shape of breath under the door. Willa had told me to look for breath. I saw nothing but the flat dark seam where the floor met the threshold and the strip of brighter dark under that where outside waited. Again the knock came. And then a voice, not loud, not whispering. It was Jennings. "Whitaker," he said. "Open up." I did not move. I could have pulled the chair back, slid the chain, thrown the bolt, and I would have been looking into the chief's face. I could picture the set of his shoulders, the way he'd hold his flashlight low to keep his night vision. I could see the crease at his mouth I had thought was skepticism, but now recognized as fatigue. I could also hear the hum under the door, like someone idling a truck under the earth. "Ranger," the voice said, "I won't stand here all night. Open up." Lights did not shiver on the walls as they would with another truck pulling up. Gravel did not crunch the way it does under boots. I stared at the seam of the door until my eyes ached, and I waited for mist of breath I had seen from human mouths on 100 cold mornings. None came. Breath makes a world around a face when air bites. There was no world around the voice. "I know you're in there," the voice said, not angry, simply stating a fact that could have been true of any cabin anyone has ever hidden inside. "Come now. No use for disobedience in my sector." My fingers closed tighter around the mug. The porcelain was cold. I remembered the way Willa had looked into the trees where I hid and spread her fingers and told me without words to keep still. I kept still. The voice did not knock again. It waited, and then it went away the way a word erases itself when you erase the chalkboard. The hum remained. It remains even as I write this with dawn a thin line behind the pines. In the thin hour, I slept for maybe 20 minutes like a man tossed into a ditch. When I woke, my body ached with the absence of rest, but the day had the apologetic light of weather coming, and the radio crackled with the regular check, and I lifted it and keyed the mic. "North Sector Ranger on?" I said, and my voice sounded like a stranger's. "Whitaker. Copy." "Whitaker," Jennings said. The tone was ordinary. Anything to report. I could say the bison calf had been moved, and then changed by something I could not describe with sounding unfit for duty. I could say my chief had knocked at my door without breath. I could write up a demerit for myself, for stepping into the night without authorization, for leaving my cabin, for following trucks like a boy sneaking after a funeral procession. I could do none of that. I said the thing that felt like it would anchor me to some normal portion of the world. "Trail washout near the spur to Jasper Creek," I said. "I'll mark and reroute day hikers." "Copy," Jennings said. He paused. "You sleep at all?" "A little," I said. "Remember to log what matters," he said, "not what feels big." Static washed the rest of the conversation away like a hand passing across a tablecloth and taking crumbs with it. I stepped onto the porch and saw 3 dead mouths under the light, bodies brittle, their dust scattered on the painted wood like someone had ground chalk with their thumb. I thought of cups on the stone, and what had filled them and what had drained them, and I felt a guilt I could not identify, the way you sometimes wake from a dream certain you've betrayed a friend and cannot recall the act. I walked to the pump and worked the handle and splashed water on my face until the cold was as loud as the hum had been. By midday, the hum had settled into something I could ignore by moving. I worked farther from the clearing, went east to where a trail crossed a meadow, pounded a post for a new sign, and met a pair of hikers from Ohio who wanted to see a bear, who wanted to see it too close. I pointed them to a safe valley where they might spot one across a river. They asked whether I was from here, and I said yes, in the way you do when a place has put its mark on you, before you knew what marks were. I walked the perimeter of a campground and picked up 2 beer cans and a length of twine and the corner of a map someone had torn by accident or anger. I spoke on the radio twice in a voice that tried to be the same as the man they had hired. When I returned to the cabin, a folded paper sat on the porch. There were boot prints in the dust, clean, ordinary, toe to heel, made by someone who knew how to walk. The paper was a page torn from a field notebook, creased neat. Inside were 4 lines in tidy, steady script. "You don't answer anyone without breath. You don't go where the trees lean after dark. You don't put your hand on the stone again. You write what you need to write, but you keep this for yourself. No signature, no name, no bait. Only the shape of care in the letters and the ghost of graphite on my fingers." I set the paper in the bottom drawer of the small desk and slid it closed. If all this stayed in the frame of an ordinary ranger season, the story would end as a private set of instructions, a new habit pattern taught by a mentor who preferred teaching to explaining. It might even have ended without the dark secret being anything other than a professional superstition. The way old firefighters won't step across a hose on the ground, the way pilots tap the dash before takeoff. But that night the quiet did not stay in its clearing. It came walking like weather, and it did not knock first. I woke to the sound of footsteps on my porch. Not attempting stealth, simply present. They crossed slow, paused at the door, then moved to the window. I saw a shadow pass across the thin curtains. An outline the size and shape of a man who carries himself like a chief does when he knows the respect he draws from a room. I watched the strip under the door where breath would show if the air were cold enough to take it. Nothing formed there. My radio clicked on without my hand touching it and hissed for a long time. When the voice finally rose through the static, it was mine. "Open up," my voice said. "It's me." I sat very still. The hum gathered at the door, not loud, not a threat exactly, but like a crowd eavesdropping the inch away from your ear. The chair under the handle strained a hair forward. The latch gave a tired metallic sound like a small animal in a snare. The chain stretched. The bolt held. "Open up," my voice said again, and this time a second voice spoke under it, a chorus a tone lower, like a harmony I had never learned to sing. It said nothing that matched English. It simply said yes with the authority of a tide. There is a kind of fear that runs in straight lines, and there is a kind that circles you so slow you don't notice the rope until it tightens. I had been circling for days. The rope pulled now. I stood not to go to the door, but to take the paper from the drawer and hold it in my hand as if 4 lines could be armor. The footsteps moved from the window to the door again. The knock came once polite. The chair shivered. The bolt held. The voices stopped together, like a conductor's hand had fallen. The hum retreated. When it receded far enough that the muths could have crawled if they were alive, I pressed my forehead against the door and breathed. My breath made a cloud on the wood in front of my mouth. Shape of a small world that did not include anything else. In the morning, I walked to the clearing not against Willa's instructions, but because they had become inadequate to address what had happened. Where the calf had lain, there was a smooth place in the dirt and a line of hair that had drifted like thistle fluff to the edge. The stone's cups were dry but dark. The spiral looked cleaner than it had 2 days prior. A single footprint lay at the boundary of bare ground. It was mine, the tread from my boot, except the direction of the mud was wrong. I had not stepped there. Something had set the echo of me down like a man sets a glass on a table to mark his place at a bar. I took my map from the pack and unfolded it, and, against everything Willa had told me, I made a small mark in pencil where the clearing waited. I told myself it was for me alone, a private way to test the truth against the paths I would later take. The pencil point snapped. A tiny bright shard of graphite dug into the paper like it wanted to stay. When I looked up, Willa stood 2 arm lengths away. She had moved like wind. She did not look angry. She looked like a person at the edge of a flood holding a rope. "I told you not to," she said. "I know," I said. "It came to my door." "I know that too," she said. "You were here?" I asked. "I was where I needed to be," she said. "It's getting worse, Daniel. The ground has an ache to it. The old folks used to say when the elk rub more than they need to. The bones under your feet are shifting. The elk have been sanding the bark off trees like they want to turn them into smooth pillars. We fed it last night. It took more than it should have. That means something changed." "What?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm supposed to go with maintenance tonight. Chief wants you at the station at dusk. There's a drawer with your name on it, and there are things you're going to read that you won't be able to unread. You come anyway." I nodded before I had considered refusing. I did not want to be in that drawer, or in that room, or in that tonight. But phrases like, "name on it," and "you won't be able to unread," are the way a person ties another to them with a string. I was tied already. I pulled my flagging tape from my pocket and handed it to her. She took it with a small nod, as if I had finally chosen to be in the conversation I had been eavesdropping on for days. She turned to go, then paused. "Bring the page," she said, "the one I wrote." "How did you? Graphite comes off on the fingers?" she said. "You had it on yours when you picked up your radio." I heard the difference in the static. I would have laughed another day at the poetry of that line. Today it was arithmetic. I folded the page and put it in my breast pocket. The wind rose, just wind this time, and the pines spoke the old weather language of needle and sky. The hum rode under it, and said nothing I could write down that wouldn't sound like I'd lost the thread of my sense. I followed Willa out of the clearing, and the world put its sounds back on like a person puts on a shirt after swimming. Dusk came like a bruise. I drove to the station. The building smelled of wet wool and coffee, and the kind of dryness that paper develops in a place where the air lives close to the ground. Jennings sat at his desk with his sleeves rolled. He looked up when I entered and let his eyes measure me the way a man measures the chance of rain. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a flat, long box. He set it on the desk and slid it toward me. My name was written on the top in neat block letters. D. Mawajikir. I put both palms on the box lid as if I could read through the cardboard. My heart did an odd double, beat like a hoof hitting a root. Jennings did not speak. Willa stood in the doorway and watched the hallway like the hallway might watch back. I lifted the lid. Inside the box lay things that did not belong together, and for that reason, told me more than any memo would have. On top was a folded letter in heavy paper with Meingen in block capitals, and under it a map printed long ago and then overdrawn in pencil, lines added and erased until the paper had become a palimpsest of choices. There was a tin of iron filings and a small cloth bag that clinked when I moved it. A compact mirror lay wrapped in oilcloth, the kind you could fold into a breast pocket without breaking. There was a coil of red cord like the braided line climbers use as a prusik, except finer, almost like waxed thread. Under that, a whistle of carved bone with a notch that ought to have made a shrill sound and yet, when I put it to my lips and blew, gave back only a feeling in my teeth. At the very bottom was a narrow notebook bound in canvas. Its edges were worn where a thumb had lived. I read the letter first. It was not from Jennings. The handwriting belonged to someone who had learned penmanship when letters still mattered to the people who saw them. Ranger, what you hold are not tools, they are reminders. Iron reminds, it does not resist. Ash reminds the ground of what it has already eaten. Red line reminds you where your hands end. The mirror tells you which face is yours. The whistle does not call, it answers. When the quiet comes walking, it will look like a choice. It is not a choice. It is a tide. Keep your feet where the land is most honest. Do not complete a spiral. Break the turn with a step elsewise. Count your steps out loud if your mind forgets numbers. If you hear your own voice, ask for breath. You are not alone unless you choose to be. R. Cole, North Sector, 1974-1986. The name rang in me without memory until I opened the canvas notebook and found the same signature at the first page. Robert Cole had made lists that weren't lists, sketches that weren't art, and sentences that looked like warnings until you read them and understood they were the way a person speaks to himself to stay the same person 2 days in a row. Northstone's 9 known, one that moves. Never stand where the circle closes by itself. If a thing asks for a name, give it a number. I turned to the folded map. Modern trails ran in neat white lines through green. Over them, in pencil, someone had shaded ovals at irregular intervals, each labeled with a date. In one corner, a legend of sorts had been added in simple words: leaned trees, thin birds, husha, no insects, cups of fold. Pull ground wants you, a cluster of ovals lay north and west of my cabin, the ink darker as if fingers had pressed there often. A line of X ran like stitches between 2 of those ovals, and beside them in pencil were 3 words left: right. Jennings watched me read. He did not rush me as a boss might. He did not explain as a teacher would. He let the items make their own sentences and waited to see which one I would answer. What is the line of S? I asked, keeping my voice even. Places to step if you need to go across a bad piece without getting kept, he said. You won't need them unless everything else has failed. And if everything else has failed? I asked. You won't ask questions, he said. You'll do what you practiced. Which is to say, you'll do what people older than you learned when it cost more than a box of reminders. Willa stood out in the hall, checking a clipboard in a way that told me she needed to hold something that was only paper. She didn't enter. Jennings shut the drawer with the heel of his hand. "You're with me tonight," he said. "Crow will be with maintenance." He said the last word in the tone of a man reading the weather report for a holiday weekend that will bring fools. "We're going to the East Meadow. Something has been leaning harder there than it has in years. We'll measure, we'll listen, we'll leave." "What do I bring?" I asked. "Boots," he said. "Hands that stay closed. And the mirror." He left me in the small conference room to read the first 10 pages of Cole's notebook. There were accounts of nights like the one I had watched from the trees, the language clean and stubbornly literal. Calf at 23:17. Cups filled at 23:21. Hum climbed to chest pressure at 23:23. 4 men present, 1 woman, radio volumes low. Spiral appeared to deepen, no visible mouth. Ground level lowered ½ inch by morning. Once in a hand more pressed than the rest, he had written. The mistake came as a favor. Don't accept favors from ground or sky. At dusk we took the park truck with the quiet suspension. Jennings drove like a man who had learned on ruts and habit. We kept the radio low enough that static became a clock. I held the mirror between my knees wrapped in its cloth and watched the road unspool into the part of the park that had fewer stories printed in glossy brochures. The hum did not begin on the air this time. It lived already under the tires like a grade you don't see until your calves tell you. We parked where the 2-track narrowed to brush. A third truck sat nose, in under the trees, engine off, marked with the maintenance badge that hides under an umbrella term all the jobs nobody asks about at the visitor desk. 2 men climbed down from its cab. One I recognized by the way his jacket fit a frame that had been carrying weight too long. The other I did not know. He had a careful face. He nodded to me as if we were neighbors and the fence between us was worth defending. "You're with the chief," he said. His name patch read KNCA'd. "We're on the pull if it starts pulling." That was all. We walked into a meadow that had not been a meadow last summer. I knew because the map still showed a young stand of aspen here. What stood now was grass like hair laid flat by a hand and then coaxed up again. The moon rose indifferent and fat. The air was colder than the road had suggested. Jennings stopped without looking at his compass, as if his thews knew north. "Count your steps," he said.
Not for me. For yourself." I counted.
It steadied me in a way that did not feel superstitious. Numbers give back what breath takes. At 37 I thought the meadow would run out. At 38 I felt the lean. Birds had withdrawn to the edges like a congregation asked to step back. The trees on the far side of the field had that same shoulder, shrugged toward a center that I had learned to watch for. The hum rose in my bones and then settled there, as if it had found the shelf it wanted. Kincaid and the other man, whose patch read Irakesen, moved to the north and south edges and stood as if they were each holding a rope only they could feel. They did not speak. Jennings crouched and put 2 fingers to the ground, and then laid his palm flat. He did not touch long. He stood again. "Shallow cups," he said. "Not filled yet." "Which means?" I asked. "Hungry," he said, "but not feeding." We waited while the night arranged itself. There are minutes in the backcountry that do not belong to the clock. They belong to the place. This was one. At some signal I missed. Kincaid lifted his hand, and Erickson answered with a nod, and I realized they were listening to something I had not learned to hear. The hum puckered and then smooth. I felt the impulse to turn, to look over my shoulder, to scan the tree line, to do all the things that make a person look busy and therefore brave. I didn't. I stood with my boots under me and let my hands stay closed. When the first shape moved at the far edge, I thought it was a person. It crossed the grass with the even step of a man who knows this meadow, moves slower than his worry, and will arrive when he arrives. Then it passed through a strip of pale grass without bending it. The mirror in my hand shivered in its cloth. "Don't answer," Jennings said, and for an instant I was offended. What question had I even been asked? Until the shape reached a distance where you would call out if you were a decent person, and the night did not have rules. "Ranger," it said, using the word like a handle. "Thanks for coming. We've got a snag up ahead." Jennings's voice came from its mouth, pitched half hum lower, as if a recording had been dragged by a sticky capstan. "Bring the tape." I didn't move. The thing smiled in a way my chief never had, too square, too even. It did not breathe. It did not make the small fog that lives ahead of a face when air bites. The mirror felt heavier, as if it wanted the ground. "Do not complete a spiral," the letter had said. The shape took 3 steps in a curve so subtle I wouldn't have noticed a week ago, and then paused, a host making room for a guest to join his arc. My feet itched to rise and match. Instead, I took 1 step to break the turn. Left, and a small right no one but me would have counted. The hum reacted as if I had dropped a pebble into a bowl. The shape's head turned more than heads should. Its smile widened and narrowed like it could not pick a size. "Daniel," it said, using my name as a weight. Kincaid spoke then, not to me. "South," he said, and Erickson answered, holding. Their voices were ordinary, which was more useful than brave would have been. The thing took 1 more step. It would have been in among us with 3. Jennings lifted his hand the way a person calls a dog to heel, and in that motion I understood he had done this before. Too many times. He did not carry iron filings or ash or red line. He carried his posture like a tool. "Mirror," he said, without looking at me. I unwrapped it and held it chest high, angled so the thing stood in the glass while I kept my eyes on the actual meadow. In the mirror, the shape looked smaller and farther away than the ground said it was. Behind it in the glass, the trees did not lean. The glass hummed, not like the ground, but like a voice put into a bottle and shaken. I felt my teeth ache. The shape took half a step more and then, without blinking, was a different distance entirely, closer by 2 strides it had not taken. The way the stone had stood in a place my sketch said it hadn't. The mirror's edge bit my palm. "Back," Jennings said quietly, and the shape stopped as if it had been taught obedience. "Hungry?" it said in my chief's voice, and then in mine. "Open up." After those 2, a 3rd voice braided itself in, lower and older and not committed to syllables. The grass around its feet made a sound like a slow exhale, as if it had been held under water and brought up too late. Kincaid took something from his pocket, only a pinch, and cast it with a practiced flick. Iron filings do not sparkle in starlight, but what he threw looked like a brief sift of glitter in the dark. They fell and darkened and made a line that the shape did not like. It turned its head too far again and smiled too square again and said nothing. "We're going to step out the way we stepped in," Jennings said. "No one hurry. If your feet want to turn, you count for them." We moved then, and the shape did not follow for a step, then 2, and then I felt it come with us from a different angle than it ought to have. The hum climbed into my sinuses. The mirror wanted to tilt. I kept it level. I said the numbers out loud because my mind had started to prefer curves. 1, 2, 3. My voice steadied itself on the wood of the words. At the edge of the meadow, the trees leaned a last time toward a center that was no longer where we had left it. Erickson said left, and we all moved left. Kincaid said left, and we did it again. Jennings said now, and I took the small right that felt like betrayal and, for that reason, worked. The air released like a knot untied. We did not run. We did not look back. We walked until the trucks looked like ordinary trucks, and the night like an ordinary night. Only then did the whistle in my pocket begin to warm as if a hand had taken hold of it through the cloth. I did not take it out. On the drive back, none of us spoke for several minutes. The hum had relented to its prior undernote. When Jennings finally cleared his throat, I recognized the sound as a man putting himself back together with the pieces he had left. "You did as asked," he said. "You didn't join the curve." "What was it?" I asked. The question had been waiting so long it felt like an old debt. "A shape the quiet wears when it comes shopping," he said. "Sometimes it wears your mother, sometimes your boss, sometimes a stranger who owes you nothing and therefore looks honest. It wants you to make the world easy by stepping where the world wants." "What happens if I step?" I asked, though my body already knew, and did not want to hear it put in a sentence. "You won't feel yourself taken," he said. "You'll feel yourself relieved of having to hold your own shape. That's the flavor of it." People mistake that for mercy all the time. We turned into the station yard. The building had its ordinary yellow light in the window. Willa's truck was not there. Neither was the maintenance rig. In the radio room, static made a shallow sea. Kincaid went his way with a nod that meant we were each still ourselves, and therefore entitled to go home. "Crow'll be late," Jennings said. He said it like weather, again, but his hands were steady with intention, not calm. "You sleep. Bring the mirror with you. Don't hang it. Keep it in your hands if knocking starts." "I'll wait up," I said. "I'll listen for her truck. You'll sleep," he said again. And the difference between an order and a wish stood in the space between us. "There are more nights to come. Spend tonight like you expect to be here tomorrow." He went to the radio without turning his back on me, as if we were still in the meadow. I took the box with me and the mirror in its cloth, and the letter folded small and the line of red cord around my wrist. Back at the cabin, I locked the door and slid the bolt and placed the chair. I set the mirror on my knees and read Cole's notebook by lantern, stopping when the ink rose into shapes that wanted to be curves. I blew the lantern out then and let my eyes fill with the kind dark. I slept against my will, and my body kept me breathing as bodies do. Sometime after midnight, a truck came down the road. I woke in time to hear tires on gravel and a door slam and footsteps on the porch. The knock was not gentle this time. It was a quick rattle as if the knuckles had too many joints. Then a voice that was not a voice, but had been made out of voices said my name the way a person tastes a word to see if it is ripe. I lifted the mirror and kept it level and looked not at the door but into the glass. In the glass the porch was empty, but the seam under the door in the world shivered as if breath had learned how to hide. The whistle in my pocket warmed until it hurt. I put it to my mouth and did not blow. I let it draw the air out of me as if it had always owned it. The sound it made was not a sound. It was the end of a curve. Outside, the knock stopped. The hum thinned to a thread and then to nothing, which was worse than something. The mirror fogged, not from my breath, but from a breath that did not live on my side of the glass. I did not lower it. I did not speak. I counted my steps while sitting still, a nonsense that nevertheless kept me. At dawn, a single sheet of paper lay inside my door, where none should have been able to slide. The edges were crisp, the writing careful. "Do not complete the circle. If she calls from the tree line, ask her to step where the frost breaks. No signature, no name." I knew whose hand had formed the letters. The note smelled faintly of iron and pine. By afternoon, the maintenance rig still had not returned. The station did not call. The hum under the day had a wobble the letter had not mentioned. The elk in the near valley rubbed their antlers against the same two trees until the bark came away like old paint. I went to the hall closet and took down my pack. I placed the mirror flat against the back panel where it would ride without flexing. I added the iron filings and the red cord, and the bone whistle, and the map with its left, right. I set on top of those the canvas notebook, open to a page where Cole had drawn a narrow bridge over a dark run and written step where the water forgets. When the sun slid low and the pines took on their evening color, I locked the cabin and stood on the porch and listened. The quiet did not hum. It waited. I understood then that wait involves a voice too. I stepped down, counted, and went toward the place where the trees leaned as if they were listening for the person who would tell them which way to fall. The trail to the east ridge felt longer than it had any right to be. My boots struck the dirt in careful rhythm, each step accompanied by the whisper of numbers under my breath. 1, 2, 3. It was not only habit now, but lifeline. The pines were tall shadows, their needles black against the bruised sky. Somewhere ahead, a raven croaked once and then fell silent, as though it had thought better of announcing itself. I carried the pack heavy with the box's contents, and though I had always thought of myself as steady in the back country, that night every sound felt like a test of my nerves. When a branch snapped underfoot, I flinched as though someone else had stepped there. The air itself was strange, carrying a pressure that made it feel as if the forest were one great lung, inhaling and holding the breath. The note had said, "If she calls from the tree line, Ask her to step where the frost breaks. I clung to those words, though I could not tell whether they had been written as instruction or warning. The ridge came up gradual, a line of stone cutting through lodgepole and spruce. From the top, I could see the meadow where we had stood with Jennings and the maintenance crew the night before. In daylight it looked harmless, a pale scar of grass in an ocean of green. But as the sun dipped lower, the lean of the trees became obvious, a whole forest bowing toward something that did not deserve reverence. I set my pack down, unwrapped the mirror, and leaned it against a stone so that it caught the last light. The glass shimmered faintly, as if already aware of what the night would ask. I spread the red cord across my wrist like a bracelet, poured a pinch of iron filings into my palm, and kept the whistle warm in my pocket. I didn't know how I would use them, only that they had been passed down because someone once had, and survived. The first hum came as twilight set in. At first I thought it was wind through distant canyons, but the trees around me were still. The sound rose and fell, the pitch vibrating the bones of my jaw, making my teeth ache. I pressed the iron filings into the dirt at my feet and whispered the numbers again. 1, 2, 3. Then, across the clearing below, a figure stepped from the tree line. It was Willa. She looked exactly as she had 2 days before, hat low, braid across her shoulders, stance steady. She raised a hand in greeting, casual as if she'd just finished a routine patrol. My chest tightened, because Willa had not returned from her assignment with maintenance. Because I had woken to the sound of something knocking, speaking with my voice. Because the note on my floor had warned me. She called out my name. Her voice carried cleanly across the meadow, unbroken by static or echo. "Daniel, you need to come down here." I did not move. "Step where the frost breaks." I called back. My voice cracked against the silence. She hesitated. A pause just long enough. Then she smiled. Too wide, too flat. Her boot shifted onto the grass. Where she stepped, no frost broke, no breath misted. The hum deepened. I gripped the mirror and angled it toward her. In the glass, the figure was not Willa at all. It was taller, thinner, its limbs too long, joints bent as though assembled from spare parts. The smile was a split too wide, carved across a face that didn't quite keep its shape. When it saw itself reflected, the figure staggered backward. The hum rose to a shriek, and the trees bowed lower still, as if dragged by the same force. "Open up," it said, in Jennings's voice. Then in mine, then in Willa's, then in dozens of voices at once, a choir of imitation. The air stank of metal like iron heated too hot. I held the mirror firm. "Back," I said, though my voice shook. The figure tilted its head unnaturally, then stepped again toward me. The ground did not register its weight. I pulled the whistle from my pocket and blew. No sound came, but the meadow shook. The grass bent as though in wind, though no wind moved. The hum wavered, disrupted, as if the whistle had answered something deeper than air. The figure recoiled, its shape shuddering, blurring between forms: Jennings, Willa, my father, myself. Faces I had known and some I had never seen. It screamed without sound, and the forest screamed with it. The trees groaned, bark cracking, branches splintering. Birds erupted from the canopy in a frantic burst, though no birds had been there a moment before. The ground under my boots trembled, as though something beneath had rolled in its sleep. The spiral stone at the meadow's center flared faintly, its grooves darkening like a mouth opening. I staggered back, counting as I moved. 1, 2, 3. My feet wanted to trace the curve to join the spiral, but I forced the small right step, breaking the circle. My chest heaved, lungs burning. The figure shrieked again, this time with sound. A low, vibrating roar that shook the ridge. The mirror cracked down the center but held together. Through the break I saw the meadow empty again. No figure, no distortion, only grass shivering under a wind that had not been there before. Then the hum stopped. Silence fell so absolute I could hear my heartbeat hammering. I did not trust it. I gathered the mirror, wrapped it tight, and shoved it into the pack. The iron filings on the dirt had melted into dark streaks, as if the ground had drunk them. I tightened the red cord around my wrist until my hand tingled. I hurried down the ridge, stumbling more than once, until I reached the safety of my cabin. When I slammed the bolt and pressed my back to the door, I realized I had been holding my breath. That night I slept little, waking at every creak. But the hum did not return. By morning, I went to the station. Jennings sat at his desk, lines carved deep into his face. He looked at me the way a man does when he's already guessed what you will say, but needs to hear it anyway. "You saw her," he said. "Not a question. I saw something," I answered. He nodded grim. "It likes to wear the people you'll follow." "Willa," I said carefully. "She hasn't come back." He didn't answer at first. Then, sometimes they don't. The weight of his words pressed harder than the hum had. "Then we go after her," I said. Jennings met my eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he sighed. "If she's still herself, she'll find her way back. If she isn't," he shook his head. "There's no pulling someone out once they've stepped too far into the circle." His certainty chilled me more than the hum. But I couldn't accept it. Not yet. "I need to try," I said. He studied me, then opened the drawer again and pulled out the canvas notebook. He flipped to a page I hadn't seen yet. The sketch showed a figure standing at the edge of a clearing, hand outstretched. Beside it were written words in cramped script: "If you seek the kept, bring witness. Never walk alone." Jennings slid the notebook across the desk. "Then you won't go alone." He stood, heavy shoulders set, and for the first time I saw not just the wary chief, but the man who had survived long enough to carry the weight of secrets. That night, we went together. The hum started before we reached the meadow. Jennings walked steady, counting under his breath. I matched him, our numbers falling into rhythm. We carried lanterns covered with red cloth, their glow faint and strange. The spiral stone waited ahead, darker than the night around it. At the tree line, we stopped. "Do not answer if it calls," Jennings reminded, "even if it's her." I nodded, though my throat was dry. The meadow stirred. From the far side, the figure stepped out again. Willa's braid, Willa's hat, Willa's steady stance. Her eyes locked on mine, full of desperate urgency. "Daniel," she called, "help me." My chest clenched. Jennings put a hand on my arm firm. "Not her," he murmured. "Please," the figure said, voice breaking. "Don't leave me here." My heart wrenched, but I forced my eyes to the ground.
"Step where the frost breaks!"
I shouted. She paused. Then she smiled. Too wide, too sharp. The meadow groaned. Jennings pulled the bone whistle from his pocket and blew. The night shuddered. The spiral stone pulsed, grooves glowing faintly like embers. The figure screamed, its face shattering into shapes, one after another. My mother, Jennings, myself, Willa again, eyes pleading. I held up the mirror, through the crack. The figure was nothing but a smear of shadow, twitching in a form that could not hold. Jennings stepped forward, scattering iron filings in an arc. The figure recoiled, stumbling back toward the stone. The hum rose into a deafening roar. The earth shook. The spiral widened, grooves splitting open like cracks in a shell. From within, a darkness deeper than night seeped upward. "Back!" Jennings barked. We stepped together, left, right. My legs trembled, but I forced the count, forced the break. The figure lunged once, then dissolved into smoke, sucked back into the spiral as the stone shuddered. The grooves closed, leaving only cold silence. Jennings exhaled. "It's fed enough for now." I stared at the empty meadow, chest heaving. What was that? Was it ever Willa? He shook his head slowly. "It was what the quiet thought you'd follow." The words hollowed me. We turned back to the cabin, our steps heavy. The hum did not follow, but its absence felt worse than its presence. That night, sleep did not come at all. I sat with the mirror on my lap, iron filings spread across the table, and the whistle clutched in my hand. Because though the meadow was silent, I knew it was only waiting. And waiting, as Jennings had told me, was a voice too. Waiting thrummed under everything the way the hum used to. Quieter, but not kinder. The day stretched thin. I split kindling I didn't need, wrote a report I wouldn't file, boiled water twice and drank none of it. Elk rubbed the same 2 trees until gray came off in curls and the pale wood shone like bone. By late afternoon, a wind walked the ridges without touching the valley floor, the kind of high air you hear before you feel. I opened Cole's notebook for anything I had missed and found. Between 2 pages stuck by old damp, a slip of paper I hadn't seen. The handwriting was the same tight hand. Never take help that removes your weight from the ground. Never go where the curve is easy. If you must seek the kept, take witness and take a memory the ground can't make for you. I didn't understand the last sentence until I shut the book and caught my reflection in the lantern glass. Face thinner than a week ago, eyes too bright, a crack of soot on my cheek I hadn't put there. The mirror on the table lay in its oilcloth like a patient. The whistle rested warm against my palm. The radio clicked and carried nothing of use. Then a sentence that seemed like it had walked half the distance itself. Crow 2 East, stop out. The static swallowed the edges so that only her name stood plain. I lifted the mic. Station Whitaker. Say again, Crow. Silence stretched. Then the ordinary morning voice of weather reports and lost hikers came on as if it had been there all along. One advisory after midnight. Expect gusts at Ridge Line. It did not answer my question because it did not know it had been asked. I walked to the station before dusk with the box's contents in my pack and the red cord looped twice around my wrist as if blood could be reminded of its road by dye. Jennings was alone at the desk. Sleeves pushed, tie loosened, hands laid flat as if to keep the building from choosing another shape. He looked up once, the assessment quick and complete, and closed the ledger. "We'll go north," he said. "Kincaid's already there with Erickson. The stone that moves has moved." "Willa?" I asked, keeping my voice steady for the first 3 letters and feeling on the last. "If we find her, it will be where it doesn't want us," he said. "So we go where it least wants us." He took a canvas bag from the drawer I had started to think of as a mouth and set it on the table. When he opened it, the air smelled like old campfire and wet wool, ash and something else, something like sage rubbed between fingers. "From the burns 15 years ago," he said. "From the timbers of Hawk Cabin when lightning found them. From a log we pulled out of the river after 2 winters of flood. Ash remembers what's gone. Will remind the ground that it has already eaten." We drove without conversation, the way men pray when they have used up words and faith both. The road climbed, dropped, twisted, and the truck took every turn like it had taken it yesterday and would again tomorrow. Night slid down the trees and pooled in the draws before it crossed the road. At the 2-track, Kincaid's rig stood with its nose into the brush and its hood cold. He and Erickson were shadows shaped like men until they stepped into the beam and became their faces careful, alive, trying not to be more than that. "Chief," Kincaid said with a small nod, "the kind you give a person when you both know that tonight might make you both liars." "Where?" Jennings asked. Erickson lifted his chin. "You'll feel it," he said, and he was right. The hum wasn't louder. It was denser, as if the night had been poured thicker across the meadow. The trees had learned a deeper bow. The center was not where it had been. The stone was not either. It had slid a distance that could be measured in bone lengths rather than feet. The shallow cups held nothing, and that was worse than when they were full, like an open hand that wasn't offering. "We do this clean," Jennings said. "No running, no answering. Cole's steps if we need them." He passed the ash bag to Kincaid, the iron to Erickson, the mirror to me. He tied the red cord around his own wrist, and then looped the other end through mine and cinched it square. "Witness," he said, and I said, "Witness." And the word had the weight of something we hadn't earned and would carry anyway. He stepped to the edge of the breathed on grass and waited until the hum found us. He glanced at his watch, then the sky. "When it comes soft," he said, "it's patient. When it comes hard, you step wrong and it makes you part of its plan." He looked at me. "You're going to want to fix the world tonight. Don't. Keep it from getting worse." The meadow rolled, not the ground. Your stomach will tell you the truth when your eyes camel. The roll came from the air itself, the way heat shimmers over a road. A shape moved at the far line and paused, and for a wicked instant the part of me that keeps the lights on and the floor swept wanted to be relieved. Willa. Hat low. Braid stance. The exact angle of weight she put on her back foot. The habit of a person who had spent years bracing against wind. Daniel. She called, and if I had listened the way grief listens, I would have broken the circle with my heart instead of my feet. Daniel, don't let him decide. Come with me. Ask for breath, Jennings said, not unkind, not daring to be more. I kept the mirror low and angled the line of the door seam in my head across the night until it lay under the shape's face. I saw no fog, no world forming at the edge of a mouth. Step where the frost breaks, I said, and my voice made a shape in the night that something did not like. Willa, or what wore her, smiled, the two-square line I knew by now to be S-shaped under the mirror. I can't, it said, letting the pleading rub against the wanting. Please, it's cold. It stepped anyway, and the grass bent wrong, like a reflection of bending rather than the thing itself. Erickson flicked iron into a thin scatter at our feet. It didn't spark. It did shine for a moment like Mecca, then darkened as if the ground had taken a memory back into itself. Kincaid scooped ash and let it fall out of his palm between his boots. He had large hands. The ash made a soft sound like muths. Jennings breathed once like a man about to take a long dive. We're crossing, he said. Left, right, and mind the one of your ankles. We stepped. The first left felt like stepping into a room where somebody you love has just left. Heat still there, shape not. The second left was heavier. I felt my heel drag as if itching to complete an arc. The small right saved my foot by a hand's width, and the red cord tugged delicately against my wrist like a pulse you can check when the room has gone too quiet. Erickson's voice came from my left, quiet as a creek under ice. Holding. Kincaid's came from my right, the word he always used for work that looked like standing still. Holding. We moved that way across a meadow that didn't want us to measure it. The stone pivoted in the corner of my eye without moving. The cups stayed empty. The shape wearing Willa stepped neither closer nor farther, and yet was twice the distance and half it in alternate heartbeats. The mirror in my hand showed a different math. The shape smaller than it should have been. The trees honest where the world said they leaned. Halfway across, the hum thickened until names became hard to form, as if vowels had to push through syrup. Jennings's hand closed once on the cord and released. The signal was both instruction and apology. He lifted his chin not at the stone but at a low run of water I hadn't noticed. Thin, narrow, the kind of seep that grass drinks before your eyes. It made a sound like muttering in a room of old men. A strip of mud ran beside it as gray as the ash we'd carried. Cole's drawing flashed in my head so clear I could smell the damp paper. Step where the water forgets. This way, I said, before my good sense could warn my mouth, and who knows whether sense would have been right. We edged toward the run. In the mirror it showed bright, like moon on fish scales. In the world it looked like nothing at all. Why? Erickson asked. He was a man who didn't spend questions. It doesn't remember, I said. We need to not be remembered. For all the stories people tell about rangers, we are mostly men and women who count and note and pay attention. Kincaid and Erickson didn't argue. They set their feet on the little strip of damp and felt, as I did, the strange alchemy of being present and yet not written down. The hum pressed. The stream muttered. The shape that wanted to be Willa took 2 smooth steps and was suddenly far closer than steps could have allowed. Its face wore apology badly. Please, it said in Willa's voice. He won't come. He'll leave me. Ask for breath. Jennings said again, and the shape's smile widened without showing teeth. Ask for breath. It echoed, the words wrong in its mouth. We walked the run like a slack line. The red cord tugged and steadied. The mirror's crack caught starlight and flung it as if the night had started to unravel. When we came within 5 strides of the stone, my teeth went tight of their own accord. The cups were still empty. That meant it was waiting for something besides what we'd brought. The ground arsed the idea of a circle under my ankles, offered me geometry as convenience. I took the small right and felt how close easy had been. Willa, I said, using her name because I had to. Because love is a tool as well as a weakness when you hold it right. If you're here, step where the frost breaks. Nothing changed in the world. In the mirror a second figure stood, nearer the tree line, smaller than the first thing, tilted as if weight had been taken from a limb against its will. It did not move. I held the glass steady and did not look with my eyes. "Again," I said, softer. "If you're here, step where the frost breaks." A thin fog formed at the seam of the mirror image's mouth. Not much, enough to make a world in front of a face. It did not speak. Its breath wrote, "Do not complete the circle." I said the instruction as much for me as for anyone. My ankle quivered as though somebody had tied a string to a bone and tugged from under the dirt. The shape near us, closer than language, laughed then, or did the thing a laugh is when sound has been put through a press. It wore 3 faces in a blink. Willa, Jennings, a child I didn't know but felt like I should. The cups seemed to deepen without taking anything in. The spiral's grooves darkened, not like ink, like river silt when the cloud comes through. My hands started to open of their own accord. "Hands closed," Jennings said, and the human voice in the order put joints back in my fingers. I crouched enough to pinch ash from Kincaid's sack. It clung to my skin. I touched a fingertip to the lip of the nearest cup and drew the ash across in a straight, mean line. It made no mark the eye could trust. The hum flinched for the first time that night. "Ash reminds," I said to the stone, to myself, to whatever lived under the word underneath everything. "You've already eaten. You've had your turn." Kincaid saw what I was doing and cast ash, not like a priest, but like a man throwing sand on ice to keep his friends from falling. Erickson flicked iron filings across the spiral, thin as frost, and they lay there a second like stars, and then dulled as if time had accelerated a season in one breath. The shape put on anger poorly, the way a novice puts on formal clothes. It moved the way a sentence tries to cheat grammar. One moment it was just outside the cups, the next it was on the wrong side of the iron and between Jennings and me. The red cord went taut. He did not let go. He stepped left twice and my body did it too before my brain could decide. The small right cut the curve and the cord slackened, and the thing that wore faces reached for my sleeve without fingers. I put the mirror between us. Glass shows what light gives it. It also refuses to lie when you ask the right question. In that cracked oval, the shape snapped to its true size, thin as hunger, tall as regret, bent wrong at the hips. It had too much knee. It had too little breath. It recoiled from itself, a trick any human knows. "Back," I said, more to me than to it, and then to Jennings. "Now." We didn't run. We didn't offer the curve any piece of us it hadn't already requested. We did the math we knew: left, left, right. The shape pressed in, not physically, but in the push you feel when a crowd wants something and the door is narrow. The cups shivered and then, with the reluctance of old habit, began to fill. Not with blood, not with oil, not with anything a body makes. With ash. With the reminder of heat gone. With the memory of wood that used to be a tree. The hum changed pitch, down, not up. It's a trick the human ear expects threat to swell. Sometimes it falls. The ground under our boots let go a fraction. The stone spiral didn't brighten. It paled, as chalk does when rubbed thin. Something older than night gave an answer I hadn't known to want, not this time. In the mirror, the second figure, the one with breath, moved not toward us, but sideways, clearing the line of a young spruce. A strip of frost lay at its feet that had no business there in this hour. It broke when the figure stepped. My throat did something close to prayer without taking a name. "Hold," Jennings said, but this hold was different. It was permission to desire and not obey. The red cord tugged, then tugged back. I took 2 steps on the water that forgets and 1 onto the scrub that remembers. The shape near the cups smiled the wide wrong smile and lunged, not forward, but into the absence ash had made, as if the reminder were an invitation it couldn't resist. That may be the closest thing to mercy I have learned out here. Sometimes the trap you set is a truth, not a lie. I reached the edge of the trees and did what any ranger would do in a simpler story. I put my hand out, empty, palm up. In the mirror, the figure with breath did the same. In the world, a woman's fingers, cold as creek stone, strong as a rope burn, took mine, and for a second all the math in the night went to 0. "Don't complete it," Willa said, and the voice was hers, scraped, hoarse, but carrying the particular cadence of a person who turns instruction into ritual as naturally as breathing. "We won't," I said, and the "we" was not rhetorical. The red cord drew a line from my wrist to Jennings. Kincaid and Erickson had anchored the other lines, the human ones you can't see until you need them. We stepped back together, not away but out, left, right. The stone did not like losing track of part of its meal and tried to make a bigger table to seat us again. The cups filled and tipped and filled again, as if looking for the flavor it had been promised. The ash insisted on yesterday, the iron insisted on shape. The whistle in my pocket heated until it hurt. I put it to my lips and let it take the air I could spare. It didn't sound, it answered. The hum cut in half like cloth. Halfway to honest ground, the shape came for us one last time. It didn't wear Willa now. It wore me. My face, my mouth saying my name with half a dozen old errors corrected. In the mirror, that face was a smear, which is the kindest a piece of glass can give. I didn't speak to it. I spoke to the air that carries more loyalty than people think. "Witness," I said, and Jennings said, "Witness," and Kincaid and Erickson said it, with that same careful nothing the best workers bring to bad jobs, and 4 human voices made a rope you cannot see but can hold. The shape stood very still, not because it wanted to, but because something that remembers older rules had reached the end of its polite. The cup steadied. The spiral paled to the faintness of chalk that will be washed by morning dew. The trees, one by one, let their shoulders unhunch. We stepped the last step, which felt like stepping out of a story you didn't agree to be the hero of, and the ground remembered us again. You don't know how kind gravity is until you feel it hold you like a friend who has taken your keys without comment. Willa's hand did not let go until the meadow was behind us and Kincaid had put a jacket around her shoulders the way a man does when he can't lift a thing but can cover it. In the lantern light, she looked thinner in the world than she had in my fear. Her braid was half gone, the rest full of needles. Her eyes were the eyes I knew. Her breath in the cold made a world in front of her face. "I tried to bring it left," she said, voice raw. "It wanted a straight line. I don't think it knows what to do when you won't give it a shape it recognizes." "Good," Jennings said in the tone of a man who will allow relief in the morning and not before. "You're here? You fed it with ash," she said. "It's eaten enough," he said. "It doesn't get to call that a favor." We didn't speak much on the way back. The night had space again. The road made sense. At the station, Jennings poured coffee that could have stripped paint and handed it around. Willa sat on the edge of the chair like a person who'd been scolded by a wave and wasn't certain the floor was an ocean. Kincaid stood, because he always did. Erickson flexed his fingers and looked at the way his knuckles worked as if grateful. "There's paperwork," Jennings said finally, and for a moment I thought he was making a joke. He wasn't. Not the kind that sees daylight. The kind that teaches the next poor fool to keep his feet. He slid the canvas notebook toward Willa. She shook her head. "Write your own," she said. "Cole's hands aren't mine. Daniel's either." She looked at me and added, not unkindly, "You don't get to inherit the whole thing and call it duty. You get to choose what you can carry without becoming part of what you're carrying." I took the mirror from the pack. The crack down the center had not lengthened. In it, the room held. My face was my face, and if the glass cheated, it did so mercifully. I wrapped it again and set it in the box without ceremony. Jennings rubbed his eyes and then pointed at the binder of old maps and penciled ovals. "We keep doing what we do," he said. "We redirect. We mislabel trails. We stack brush in spring a little less artfully than we could. We put picnic tables where the ground is honest. We lie in the places that make people safer for not knowing the shape of the truth. We feed it what would rot and nothing more. We don't accept favors from ground or sky." He looked at me until I understood the look was not a test anymore. It was invitation and warning both. "You wanted the job that lets you stand in a cathedral that was here before our grandfathers could name the stars. You have it. It comes with a mop and a ledger and nights like this. You stay if you can. If you can't, you leave before it writes you down as part of its furniture. I'll stay, I said, and the words did not feel foolish the way brave words sometimes do when said too near morning. Willa pulled the red cord from her wrist and coiled it slow, like rope after a long climb. You write first, she said to me. About the cups and the ash, about the water that forgets, about counting when your feet want to turn, about asking for breath. Will, I said. Write about not completing the circle, Kincaid said, and Erickson added, write about hands closed. I wrote. The first lines came as if they had been waiting in the lantern glass for a person to hold a pen. I am Ranger Daniel Whittaker. There are places in Yellowstone that do not belong to us. We do not control them, police them, or claim them. We learn their rules and teach one another to keep people from walking into their mouths. We pay what we owe in carcasses and ash and patience. We do not accept favors. We do not finish curves we did not draw. Dawn came ordinary. Wind rattled the flag halyard. Somewhere a raven announced itself without apology. The world had the decency to look like it had looked before. That counts as a miracle more often than most people ever notice. Every job has a secret you don't say on the tour. In ours, it is not that the geysers are dangerous or the bison unpredictable or the winters too long. People can read that on signs. The secret is that the park is a living thing with appetites and old arrangements. We are the latest caretakers of a truce that predates our names. We are not its masters, we are its neighbors. On our best days, we are good ones. I walked back to the cabin with the box under my arm and the red cord around my wrist because ritual, like locks, doesn't stop everything worth stopping, but reminds you where your bones end and the dark begins. The porch had a dusting of new moths, bodies light as ash. I swept them off with the side of my hand and apologized in case apology helps. Before I closed the door, I looked out across the trees toward a meadow no map will show. The lean of the lodge poles had eased to a shrug rather than a bow. Somewhere under the ground something old rolled onto its other side. It had eaten. It had been reminded it would want again. That is the story of every living thing. I set the mirror on the table and wrote the last line of my private report in the same block letters I had found on that first folded note. Do not complete the circle. Ask for breath. Count out loud when your feet forget numbers. Pay what you owe, no more. When night came, it knocked once, polite. I stood and looked at the seam at the bottom of the door until I saw the small world form in front of a face. Breath shaped the air. A voice came, hoarse but human. It's me, Willa said. I did.